Nestled in the affluent suburbs of Detroit, a web of dark secrets and hidden lives shock a community and rip a family apart with murder.
It's a sad story. It's a tragic story that involves so many different lies and secrets.
It was a shock to everybody. People were in tears in this community.
It looked like they had the perfect life, but there were a lot of secrets going on.
Lie after lie and secret after secret, the deceptions grow.
They got bigger, and they got bigger. And when you have all those lies, eventually it falls apart.
Exposing incredible evil.
It was very disturbing.
The hair in the back of my neck stood up. Something's going on here, you know.
I've never seen a murder like this.
How did this happen, and who was responsible?
Nobody could figure this out.
It tore up a lot of people's lives.
We need to find the person who did this.
And that's where the secret lies.
A secret to die for.
Grosse Pointe Park is a beautiful place. Beautiful homes, expensive homes. It's a close-knit community. The neighbors look out for each other. It's affluent.
If you have the money, this is where you want to live. Probably one of the top communities in Michigan and in the United States.
It's a great place to raise your family. Good schools, good city services. Crime is low.
Grosse Pointe hadn't had a homicide in 3 decades.
Grosse Pointe Park residents Jane and Bob Bashara are living the American dream.
Bob and Jane lived in an upscale neighborhood down by the water. It was pretty idyllic.
They had a beautiful home, 2 wonderful children. They had just a beautiful persona of what a happy married couple should be.
Bob was very respected, and Jane was a real pillar in the community. She was loved by a lot of people.
It looked like they had the perfect life, like one of those Norman Rockwell paintings.
Bob had a very big image.
He portrayed himself as this big persona, this big personality around town.
Bob's father was a very prominent judge, and his grandfather was a magistrate. Very well-respected men. And I think Bob wanted to take after them. He liked people to admire him. He liked to be envied by people. He liked to be the center of attention.
He was the president of the local Rotary Club. He was the director of the local golf league.
And he was a member of the very exclusive country club there and golf club.
And that's what he was. He was bigger than life. He was Big Bob.
But things are not always as they seem.
Jane was a very driven woman. She was intelligent, very well liked by the community, by her family, her co-workers.
She was an excellent human being. And she was a person that all her friends came to for advice, for help.
Jane was a marketing representative. She worked hard her whole life.
She retired early. She had a ton of savings.
She did a lot of community work, tons of work for the church. She was married to this wonderful man.
Jane and Bob are in the prime of their lives with 2 grown children away at college.
They had 2 children, Bob Jr. and Jessica. Jessica and Jane were really tight, even more so than most mother and daughters.
She loved her children. Jane was a great mom.
She had this beautiful family that looked to be perfect from the outside. But if you took a peek on the inside, it wasn't exactly perfect.
Every perfect story has secrets. And secrets have a way of revealing themselves.
They had struggles in their marriage.
But I think both of them felt like they had an image that they had to uphold.
The Bashara's problems scratch their way out of the shadows when Bob's real estate business begins to flounder.
Bob managed quite a few rental properties, and they were going down the drain. They were not doing well at all.
The real estate market took a downturn during the recession. He's losing money hand over fist. That affected him more than it would your average Joe. With Bob, his persona of a rich guy was everything to him.
Bob had a very big ego.
He's the big real estate guy. He considered himself the toast of Grosse Pointe, and that's really all Bob had to cling to.
So he pretends nothing is wrong. But a failing business and financial instability affect every aspect of the Bashara's life.
When Jane found out, she was very upset.
He was so bad with his financial dealings that she was forced to go back to work.
After saving all these years and after retiring, she had to do it all over again. There was a lot of resentment there.
Jane also discovers that Bob has another secret.
Bob had a severe gambling problem. There was one incident in Las Vegas where Bob gambled $10,000 of Jane's savings, gambled it away. Jane was livid.
Looking for comfort and support, Jane tells her daughter Jessica about some of her problems.
Jane told her that they've been having some marital issues and they're trying to work things out.
And their problems will only get worse.
Jessica was home from college. And she discovered Bob surfing fetish websites. And it greatly upset her.
It was a horrible situation, a very embarrassing situation.
Bob Bashara's secret sexual interests have been discovered by his daughter.
She says, "What are you doing? What are you looking at?" He tells her, "Your mom can no longer satisfy me sexually, and I need to find other avenues."
Very shocking. To tell your daughter that, that's unforgivable.
Devastated, Jessica confides in her mother.
Jane must have been mortified.
If you're in Jane's shoes there, how do you deal with that? Jane was concerned about image as much as Bob was. She didn't want it well known that they were having marital problems.
So she was very determined to make their marriage work.
To help save their relationship and image in the community, Bob and Jane seek professional help.
They went to marriage counseling because they weren't getting along. Jane felt that Bob wasn't being honest and truthful with her.
In fact, Bob's mind may very well be somewhere else.
Bob was two-sided. He's going to participate in marriage counseling. He's going to improve himself. Things are going to work out. But it was all a lie.
Immersing himself in work and play, Bob spends more time at the golf course and visiting his properties like his apartment complex that holds the Hard Luck Lounge.
The Hard Luck Lounge is your typical dive bar in Detroit. Above it, there were a few apartments that Bob rented out. He could go in there and be Big Bob.
The guys who owned the bar were friends of mine, and I'd see him there once in a while.
He owned the building, so everybody sort of treated him with respect.
He was well known there.
And Bob likes the attention from the female patrons.
Bob used this property as his den of iniquity, let's call it.
As distance and turmoil builds in the marriage and lives of Jane and Bob Bashara, Jane reaches out to a dear friend.
Jane confided that Bob asked her to go to a key party.
A key party is when all the participants take their keys, throw them in a big bowl, and then everyone takes a set of keys, and whosever key you hold, you have sex with that person.
Jane said she didn't want any part of that. She wanted nothing to do with it. She told him, "Nah, you can go do whatever you want. Go do that. I'm not into it. Just don't embarrass the family."
But there are more secrets to be uncovered in this family.
They got bigger, and they got bigger, and they got bigger.
That will lead to murder.
When you have all those lies, eventually it falls apart.
There are secrets and turmoil in the private lives of Bob and Jane Bashara. But to the unexpecting community, life goes on as normal.
You had a couple who from the outside appeared everything's still great. You know, they attend all the right things. She ran the mother's club at the high school. They go to church, he's the church deacon, etc., etc.
I think Jane did like living a nice life in Grosse Pointe and everything that went along with that.
As Bob navigates his daily routine of managing his apartment buildings, he has business with Steve Tibado, owner of a local appliance shop.
Bob would come to my store and he'd say, I want 5 stoves and 5 refrigerators. One time he came in and asked me if I knew somebody that could take care of one of his apartment buildings.
Bob needs a handyman to do some work around his properties, and Steve knows just the man.
I always try to help people out. I gave Bob Joe's number. He's a real big guy. He's real strong. I says, maybe you take him on as a worker.
Bob hires Joe Gent as a handyman and gives him an apartment in one of his buildings. It's a good arrangement for both men.
Joe called me and he thanked me for hooking him up with Bob. I said, no problem. I hope it works for you guys.
With a handyman at his beck and call, Bob puts Joe to work.
After Bob hired Joe, he told him to go by his house and do some work in the yard. He met Jane briefly. They had a conversation.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I thought it was
Beautiful wife.
That's very nice of you. Thank you.
Little does anyone know that the 6'4", 225-pound man has secrets of his own.
Joe Gens had an explosive temper. He had a criminal history. He was married at one time, and we know that he was physically and verbally abusive to his ex-wife. He was fighting to keep custody of his daughter, and he was desperate for money.
But what's unknown to Bob's family, friends and business associates is that his deceit also runs deep.
Bob was leading a double life.
With unusual interests.
He puts an ad on a kinky website. Master from Grosse Pointe looking for a slave.
And he finds a taker.
Rachel was divorced. She was a mother. She was basically bored with the way her life was going.
She wanted to put herself in a master's hands. He could then financially take care of her, make all the decisions. And Bob said he was that man.
But juggling 2 very different lives isn't easy.
Bob was smart in the sense that he knew how to balance his lies and his secrets.
As time went on, it became a pretty intense relationship. And I think Rachel wasn't in love with him.
They were in this BDSM master-slave relationship where he controlled everything about her and took care of her.
For convenience, Bob moves Rachel closer.
He moved Rachel into one of the apartments above the Hard Luck Lounge. Like a bird in a cage, I think Bob wanted to keep Rachel.
But it turns out there are other nefarious reasons. There are strange things going on in the basement of the Hard Luck Lounge.
Neighbors would see people coming out of there dressed in all leather and whips and chains at all hours of the night.
Seen a lot of crazy stuff going on over there in the alley. I seen these people dressed up. I go, well, they must be having a masquerade party somewhere, but I didn't know it was in the basement.
As Bob's affair deepens, he makes plans to insert himself into Rachel's family life and spins another lie to Jane.
He had told Jane that he was going to Florida to meet up with an old friend to have a golf weekend, but it was all a lie. Bob went to South Carolina for Rachel's daughter's wedding.
Unbeknownst to Jane, Bob paid for the entire wedding with Jane's money.
Despite his charming facade, Bob isn't being honest or truthful to either Jane or Rachel.
He's keeping secrets from his mistress. He was keeping secrets from his family.
Yet Bob starts looking for more.
It wasn't good enough just to have Rachel serving him. He wanted the third to join their kinky relationship.
Bob went online to look for their third person for their relationship, and he found a possibility.
A woman named Janet who lived in Oregon. Rachel wasn't happy about him wanting to introduce another woman, but she went along with it because he was Master Bob, and what Master says she has to do.
Eager to explore the possibilities with Janet in Oregon, Bob deceives Jane again.
Bob tells his wife he has to go to this symposium of teaching him how to sell cleaning products, and it'll maybe help him make some money.
Jane was happy about that because she figured that the household needed more income.
But in reality, that was a total lie.
He didn't think he's going to get caught, but he just kept going on and on and on. Here he is going to Oregon to see some girl to have some sexual encounter with.
but she was put off by Bob.
And it just didn't work out.
Bob returns home, his conquest to Oregon a failure. And things only get worse for him when Rachel does some online sleuthing.
Rachel found out he was still married. She saw pictures of him online with Jane at a bunch of parties.
So Bob spins more deception.
Bob, of course, lied again and told her it was all in the works. He's going to get divorced. He just needed time. And Rachel believed him.
Bob goes one step further and tells Rachel he wants to elevate his commitment to her and buy a house together.
And Rachel was ecstatic.
But there are problems.
Rachel believed that Bob was this wealthy man, but Bob could not afford to buy a home. He was broke.
But he still went through the whole charade of hiring a real estate agent, looking at houses, and they even decided on a home and set up a closing.
But Bob needs to get some money together, so he tells Rachel they have to delay the purchase of their house.
There was always a reason why it couldn't happen. It was just keep pushing it off, pushing it off.
Rachel didn't know what was going on. She was not happy.
Bob's delay tactics renew her fears about his commitment.
He kept telling Rachel he's going to get divorced, but that never came to fruition.
Frustrated, Rachel draws a battle line in the sand.
Rachel gave Bob an ultimatum. Either he divorced his wife or she's gone.
The two main women in Bob's life are reaching their breaking point, and Bob's deception is the fuel on the fire.
Jane started to suspect that he was having an affair.
And at the same time, Rachel put pressure on Bob to see those divorce papers, which of course never existed.
Bob was desperate at this point. He had a deadline of January 27 to close on the home that he was to purchase with Rachel.
Bob was in love with Rachel. And he didn't know what to do, so he panicked.
With his back against the wall, Bob does something dastardly.
In his mind, he had one solution. Jane's money.
She had a pretty significant 401k.
She had $800,000 in savings.
Bob went behind her back and took some money out of her account.
Bob steals from his wife to get a down payment for his mistress, but it doesn't take long until Jane discovers her money is missing.
Jane was so mad. She was angry.
Jane knows who to blame.
By this point in time, she didn't trust Bob. She knew he lies and that he would do things behind her back without her knowledge or permission.
And it only gets worse.
Bob was seen out in a local restaurant with Rachel, and that person sent an anonymous letter to Jane that Bob was having an affair.
The secret that Bob kept hidden from his wife has been finally brought into light, fully exposed for Jane to reevaluate virtually everything she thought she knew. Bob's lavish spending, his peculiar interests in violent sexual imagery, his so-called business trips.
She was angry at her husband.
And herself. Jane vows to confront Bob face to face with what she discovered.
She was considering a divorce.
Jane organises with Bob to have dinner the following evening.
He didn't know that Jane was going to divorce him. He had no idea.
In fact, no one could have predicted what was about to happen.
The next morning, Jane got dressed and went off to work. Bob went off to go take care of his rental properties. Toward the end of the afternoon, Jane and Bob had a phone conversation, and she reminded him to be home that night.
Until then, Bob stops by the Hard Luck Lounge.
He went there and hung out. He had a few drinks.
Around 8 p.m, Bob leaves to meet Jane for dinner.
Bob came home and he looked around and Jane wasn't there, but her briefcase was on the table. And he just figured, she's probably out doing something. He didn't worry about it.
But after several hours, there's still no sign of Jane. Bob calls Jessica to see if she's heard from her mother.
He goes, says, hey, Mom ain't home. Have you heard from Mom? No, Dad, I haven't heard from Mom.
And Jessica said she's probably out with friends.
But when Bob contacts them, they tell him they haven't heard from Jane either.
It made no sense whatsoever. Something was wrong.
At 11 p.m, Bob Bashara calls 911.
Grosse Pointe Park, Police and Fire.
My name is Bob Bashara. My wife is not around, and she's not answering her cell phone, and the car and her purse and her are gone, and I'm just a little concerned.
Since Jane has not been missing for more than 24 hours, police are unable to do anything. They tell him to call back tomorrow if Jane doesn't turn up.
Bob was panicking.
He tells Jessica he thinks something horrible may have happened to her mother. And they would soon learn the answer.
The next morning, a tow truck driver was out on the east side of Detroit doing their normal rounds, looking for abandoned cars to tow. And he came across a high-end car in an alley in a desolate part of town.
And to everyone's shock, the car isn't empty.
There's a white female body in the back seat.
The morning after Jane Bashara is reported missing, a Detroit tow truck driver makes a grisly discovery.
At first, the tow truck driver believed it was just a stolen car, so he's just going to tow it to his yard. He goes towards the rear of the car and sees a body inside.
The tow truck driver notified the Grosse Pointe police. They ran the license plate and it came back to Jane.
Grosse Pointe Park Police Detective Michael Narduzzi is one of the first law enforcement officers at the scene.
We looked inside the car and saw Jane's body. She was deceased. She was laying on the bench in the back seat with her knees and her feet on the floor. She had heavy trauma to the left side of her jawline and neck. It was deep, dark purple from her ear all the way down to the middle of her neck. We knew we had homicide at that point.
Narduzzi is assigned lead detective on the case.
There was a ton of pressure.
Grosse Pointe Park police, we haven't had a homicide in 3 decades.
I felt determination that we're going to bring whoever did this to justice.
Narduzzi and his team of investigators examine the crime scene for potential clues.
There were so many elements of this that stood out initially. What was she doing on the east side of Detroit?
It's a bad area of Detroit. She had no reason to be there. Somebody brought her there.
Detectives consider the possibility that Jane Bashara may have been carjacked, driven to the location, then robbed and murdered.
But it appeared that nothing was taken. Her cell phone was there, her wallet, credit cards, her ID was there on the floor of the passenger side.
This evidence suggests there must be another motive behind Jane Bashara's murder. But what?
This isn't your normal murder case. There's more to this.
Grosse Pointe Park police drive to the Bashara residence to inform Jane's family of her murder.
Over the years, I've had to make a few death notifications, and it's not pleasant at all. It's one of the worst parts of the job.
They were devastated, especially the daughter. They want to know what happened.
To determine that, detectives ask Bob if he's willing to come down to the station to answer some questions.
Usually the spouse is the first person you want to either clear or not clear, and then move on with your investigation.
Investigators ask the grief-stricken husband if there was anything unusual about the day his wife disappeared.
Bob told law enforcement that his wife was at work that day.
Toward the end of the afternoon, Jane and Bob had a phone conversation, and she reminded him to be home that night because they were supposed to go over their taxes together.
She called me and said that she was on her way home and that she'd be home around 5:15, 5:30.
And then he said, I went home later and she wasn't home.
I'm looking, I don't find her, so I will, I'll check the garage. Her car's not there. Once I determine she's not home, I call her. And no answer, nothing.
Detectives ask Bob if he knew of any potential reason why his wife may have gone to the area of Detroit she was eventually found in.
What was she doing there?
It's a pretty bad neighborhood.
Bob reveals to detectives that he recently discovered his wife was hiding something from him.
I'm not going to narc on my poor wife, but she did smoke marijuana.
He said, I don't know where she would get it. Maybe she got it in that area.
That's one angle that we definitely have to look into and work it thoroughly. They have racked my brain.
Bob also offers another potential theory of what may have happened to his wife.
At the time, there was a series of murders.
The local press dubbed them the Backpage Murders after 4 Detroit women were found slain in their vehicles after they answered dating ads on an adult website. Is it possible that Jane was also murdered during one of these clandestine sexual hookups?
But the profile of this incident did not meet the MO of the Backpage murders that were going on.
And Jane's family claims she would never have considered cheating on Bob.
Is there anything else that comes to mind? No.
With little else to go on, detectives are stumped. Why would anyone want to murder Jane Bashara?
There was not a negative thing ever said about her by anyone. She was by all accounts, just an excellent human being.
A testament to that is the public's reaction to the news she's been murdered.
I was crying like a little baby. I mean, Jane was a wonderful, fine person.
She'd walk into a room and light it up, and somebody's taken that life away.
The news of her death just hit like a bomb. I mean, she was so well loved.
A public candlelight vigil is organised in honour of Jane, drawing hundreds of Detroit residents.
So much emotion here tonight, so many tears.
Everyone at this candlelight vigil just talked about what a great woman she was, and the whole community was in mourning.
There's no words. There's no words. A wonderful, loving person to all of us.
It's a senseless crime.
And front and centre is the grieving husband.
He held a press conference outside his house.
This is an unconceivable tragedy.
He goes on Good Morning America with his daughter. He goes on the national news. The public can't get enough of it.
It's just unthinkable that this happened to her and what she had to suffer. I am just so upset about it.
It's the lead story for the next 3 days.
With heightened media attention, images of Bob are broadcast to a wide audience. And that's when the phones light up.
Tips started pouring in, and I mean pouring in.
What surprises police is the anonymous callers don't reveal the identity of Jane's killer, but instead detail stunning secrets about the tearful widower himself, Bob Bashara.
People recognized him.
He's Master Bob. That was his alter ego.
He's in the BDSM lifestyle.
And that's not all.
We learned that he had a BDSM dungeon in the basement of the Hard Luck Lounge,
where they practiced different sexual acts. Nobody knew about this dungeon, especially his wife.
Suddenly, the mild-mannered father and upstanding community member has his facade ripped down and his hidden life is exposed to the entire world.
People were just absolutely shocked that this guy had this secret life.
And there are even more deceptions, lies, and secrets waiting to be uncovered.
Rachel wanted to live with this man in a beautiful house, happily ever after. It wouldn't happen unless Jane was gone.
As the mysterious details around Jane Bashara's tragic murder continue to dominate the news.
What happened to Jane Bashara and who may have killed her?
Abandoned in an alley.
Police say she died of strangulation.
New reports of Bob's secret sexual activities make headlines.
Bob Bashara's alleged secret life.
And Bashir's interest and involvement in the S&M bondage community.
There was a lot of interest in this story, like almost nothing I've ever seen. People were like, wow, this isn't the guy we thought he was. Bob's into some freaky stuff.
This is Master Bob. He goes to BDSM parties on the weekends.
And he's got a sex dungeon in the basement of the Hard Luck Lounge.
The shocking revelation leaves investigators wondering, does Bob Bashara's secret have any connection to his wife's murder?
But I don't think a lot of people believe that Bob could have been involved.
Bob was just this personable, wonderful, caring, giving philanthropist. It was incomprehensible that he could do that.
As detectives work through the new information of their own local fetish master, they discover one of Bob's other secrets, and she is living and breathing.
Bob was dating a girl named Rachel.
His dungeon's most loyal patron. Does Bob's secret mistress know anything about Jane's murder?
We found out exactly who Rachel was, and we got a hold of her within a few days.
Rachel agrees to be interviewed about her relationship with Bob.
She said she was looking for a daddy. She wanted someone who was going to financially, emotionally, and everything else take care of her.
Rachel also tells detectives something intriguing. She and Bob were planning on purchasing a house together in Grosse Pointe, but Rachel wanted proof that Bob was divorced from his wife.
And he couldn't produce those papers. He would always put her off.
Rachel reveals she gave Bob an ultimatum: divorce his wife by the home's closing date, or they were through.
The closing date was January 27, 3 days after Jane's murder.
The timing may raise suspicions about Rachel.
She wanted to live with this man in a beautiful house, happily ever after. It wouldn't happen unless Jane was gone.
But after speaking with her, detectives don't believe Rachel had it in her to kill anyone.
She was a good person. She just didn't know any better. He had lied to her, and she bought into it because she had no reason to believe different.
They believe Bob Bashara had a more convincing motive to murder his wife.
His whole world is crumbling on him. He had a line that Rachel drew in the sand that he had to be divorced by this date.
In Bob's mind, if Jane was gone, he would have the money available to buy the home and live his fantasy life with Rachel.
Detectives start working on the angle that Bob probably did it, because the husband is usually the number one suspect in murders like this.
It's not long before police uncover compelling evidence against him. Several female patrons of Bob's secret sex dungeon claim the respected real estate mogul often displayed disturbing behaviour.
Even within that subgroup, he was kind of considered kind of scummy because he would just start whipping them like as hard as he could without their permission. You don't do that, and he did that all the time.
There would be more tales of Bob's frightening sexual conduct when detectives receive a call from Janet, the woman Bob visited a few months earlier in Oregon.
According to Janet, she met with him, and he all of a sudden came up behind her and choked her until she passed out.
He beat the living daylights out of her. She was mortified. She was scared to death. She couldn't walk for 3 months afterwards.
Detectives have heard enough about Bob's violent and sadistic behaviour. They bring him in for more questioning.
Bob told law enforcement that he had nothing to do with his wife's murder.
The Hard Luck Lounge, I think I went in there about 5:15, had a drink.
He points to his alibi as proof. He was at his favourite drinking spot.
He said he spent a lot of time at the Hard Luck that day.
Despite his alibi, detectives suspect he may still have something to do with Jane's murder.
All right, Mr. Sharon, I'll be talking to you tomorrow. Yes.
Fortunately, they have a way to see if Bob's hiding something. A lie detector test.
It's a great tool for us to use. If he passes it, law enforcement's going to clear him.
Detectives are intrigued by the results.
He passes a couple questions, but most of the questions he doesn't pass.
It's enough for police to obtain a search warrant on his house. The heightened police presence around the home draws the attention of local news stations.
The media was in a frenzy.
As seen in these news clips from that day.
They took computers out of the house, they took other items out of the house, searching for hours, taking countless pictures inside and using dogs to search for any evidence.
Nobody knew what was going on.
They soon learn that Bob Bashara is under investigation for his wife's murder.
With her husband being called a person of interest, no one wants to believe it.
There were a lot of people in the community that just could not believe that Bob Bashara did this.
And they may be right.
They go through looking for evidence in the house. They don't find any blood. Nothing's messed up. They don't find anything. So what does Bob do? Goes on TV. I love my wife. I have 2 children. I'm a good person. This wasn't me.
But in a remarkable turn of events, the grieving husband, Bob Bashara, would end up offering another potential suspect to police.
I get a letter from the chief that was delivered by Bob's lawyer, naming Joe Gentz as a suspect, saying this guy has been harassing my client, Bob, demanding money for work he's done, and you should take a look at him.
Is it possible that handyman Joe Gentz was responsible for Jane's murder?
We learned he had a propensity for an explosive temper, for violent outbreaks at times.
We contacted him and he agreed to meet with us.
And Joe reveals something shocking.
I did it.
One week after Jane Bashara's lifeless body was found in her car, Grosse Pointe police have finally found her killer. Joe Gentz, the handyman Bob had hired.
Nobody knew anything about Joe Gentz at the time. He went into the Grosse Pointe Police Department and said, I killed that lady. I don't think they believed him.
We need to kind of know how you did it.
Detective Michael Narduzzi interrogates the 6'4" suspect to see if he's telling the truth.
It's very important, Joe, because the way you tell us you did it has got to match up with the forensic evidence on her. If it doesn't, then there might be some issues.
He laid out exactly what he did and how it went down.
But he reveals something shocking.
Bob told me to take her out.
He told us Bob coerced him into doing it, and that Bob was bugging him for months about killing his wife, Jane.
What did he say? He said, want my wife dead.
He was going to give him a Cadillac and money. First was $5,000, then it was $8,000 to kill Jane. During this time frame, Joe had a court case to get custody of his daughter, and he was desperate for money.
I said, okay.
And Bob said it had to be done immediately.
He had a deadline. Okay. I don't know what that deadline is or why. Okay.
Detectives believe they do. The closing date on Bob and Rachel's house.
The closing was set for, I believe, January 27th. And the week prior to that, Rachel said, I'm not moving in until I see these divorce papers.
Joe finally agreed to carry out Bob's diabolical plan on the evening of January the 24th, 3 days before the closing of the house.
Bob met me there, okay? He let me in the garage.
Jane came home from work, and she went in the garage.
And finds Joe there, moving boxes.
Joe says Bob then pulled a gun out and said, do it now.
What am I doing now?
According to Joe, if he didn't kill Jane, Bob was going to shoot him.
I hit her down on the ground. Where did you hit her? Back of the neck.
Joe then grabs Jane and he chokes her.
She tries to fight back.
Did she hit you? Did she pull your hair? She grabbed you. She scratched you.
He's got 2 distinct marks on his back.
She got you there. She got you about that. Thank you. Okay.
And then he put his boot on her neck and crushed her neck. He said he heard it snap. I mean, just brutal, 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 brutal.
They both pick her up and put her body in the back of her SUV. And then Bob tells Joe to take her purse and sort of empty its contents out on the front seat to make it look like a robbery. And then Joe drives the SUV to a terrible part of town in the east side of Detroit.
And he got out and walked away.
After Joe disposed of Jane's body, Bob Bashara went back to the Hard Luck Lounge.
He was trying to build an alibi that he was over there the whole time. It all started to make sense.
They know Bob had a good motive for killing his wife.
He wanted the money that she had so he could start his new life with Rachel.
But detectives know it's just Joe's word against his.
Bob vehemently denied having anything to do with Jane's death. He denied hiring Joe Gentz to murder her. He denied being there. And he said Mr. Gentz did it all on his own.
Joe Gentz is charged with the murder of Jane Bashara and placed in the county jail to await trial. But questions about Bob Bashara's involvement still remain. That is until one of Bob's business associates contacts police with information about Bob.
Bob called me and said he's going to have all sorts of problems with Joe. As he said, if that guy testifies, it could be his life.
Bob asked him if he knew anybody that could kill Joe while he was inside the county jail.
Fearful for his own life, Steve tells him he knows someone in jail that can do the deed, and the pair agree to meet up at a later date to discuss the details.
I mean, here's somebody goes talking about murdering somebody. I thought Bob was going to kill me.
The next call that Steve makes is to the Grosse Pointe Park Police Station.
I'm the guy that introduced Bob to Joe, and I felt bad about putting those two people together.
They tell Steve, all right, we're gonna put a wire on you, and we want you to meet with him, and we want you to discuss what he discussed over the phone.
I met Bob at my store. I felt obligated to Jane and her family, you know, to try to get justice for her.
Doesn't know is that law enforcement officers are watching and recording everything he says.
How much you talking? 20. Cash. No check. Yeah. Correct. Just yes or no. You think you can do that? Yes.
And he gave me $2,000. He says, take care of it.
Once Bob was caught giving the money to Steve to put the hit out on Joe, there was probable cause to arrest him for solicitation for murder.
With Bob Bashara behind bars, Detroit prosecutors begin to build the case against him for the murder of his wife. And when he's finally brought to trial, the evidence against him is insurmountable.
Next thing I know, he pulls a gun on me.
Joe was there, along with 30, 40 other witnesses.
Bob was convicted and sentenced to life in prison.
In August 2020, Bob Bashara died in prison while serving out his life sentence for the murder of his wife. Joe Gentz remains in jail, and although he is a convicted killer, some consider him a victim too.
I feel bad for Joe because he was used and duped. He ended up taking a plea deal and getting 18 to 28 years in prison for being coerced and cajoled and threatened by Bob.
There are so many victims of Bob's secrets and his lies. His wife, his children. Rachel, she was a victim as well.
But to those closest to Jane, the devastating loss will be felt forever.
The heartbreak is just incredible for the whole family.
It's a sad story. It's a tragic story. I get choked up even thinking about it.
I wish it would have never happened, you know? If I could turn back the hands of time, well, I'd turn them back. And everybody'd still be alive today.
Jane was a loving and devoted mother. She was a great wife. She was a great daughter, friend, relative, co-worker. She was admired by so many different people. She is sadly missed.